I'm Christina. I identify myself as a Christian Dalit woman. I grew up in a family that got converted into Christianity 3 generations ago. I come from a context that was primarily very Christian in its upbringing rather than Dalit. And that was because even as we were growing up, no one really spoke about caste. It was when I was in my 3rd standard that I got a little curious about, wanting to know who I was and what caste I belonged to. And so I went to my mother and I was like, Amma, what caste are we? Apo, she said, we are from the Parayar community, and that this is the kind of occupation that we did back in those days. I, unsurprisingly, was very disappointed to hear that, and I could not take the fact that we did something so lowly. And even as a very young child, I would have barely been in my 3rd standard, I realized that that was something that to be ashamed of. And so I felt very disappointed and ashamed of the work or the labor that our people were involved in, although it was several generations ago. But that was it. That was the only time that we may have spoken about caste, and we didn't quite explore it politically, so to say. Like I said, because we were a very Christian family, and in a way because our parents wanted to protect us from the kind of discrimination or from the kind of treatment that they might have faced as children and as adults, they kept telling us that our primary identity was that of a Christian. So within the church walls, we were equal, at least theoretically, on principle, we were understood to be equal. This is not to say that we did not have caste experiences even within the church or in the Christian school that I went to study in. We very much had those caste experiences, but we did not have the political language or the politicization to understand that those were caste experiences. That realization that these were indeed caste experiences came to me when I got into college. Why are my friends treating me the way they are treating? Why is it I don't have social capital? Why is it I never seem to know people in high places? Why is that in relationships I'm being treated the way I'm being treated, particularly in romantic relationships? I became part of the student Christian movement. This movement was different from that of other contemporary Christian movements in the sense like they did not just focus on the spiritual, but they also focused on the social that influences a person's spirituality or spiritual understanding of the world. That's when I got to know what it means to be Dalit. That's when I met women like me, probably the person that I was going to grow up into. I met people who spoke about the Dalit identity, gender, what it means to be, what it means to realize these identities of ourselves in a world that is so discriminating of us. I think identity is not essential, right? I mean, a very loose common identity is that of a human being. We are all human beings and humanity defines us. So in an ideal world, I think this should be enough. It is enough to call ourselves human beings and understand what humanity is and go about our lives so it should not matter. But we don't live in an ideal world. We are living in a world where we are labeled based on what they see, based on what has been prescribed to us. And therefore, identity has become important. There is, of course, a mainstream feminist narrative, and there is the Dalit women's feminist narrative. Dalit women's fight have been a fight for survival. Dalit women's fight have been a fight to exist, a fight to, be able to lead an entire life without being raped or without being killed or without being murdered, So our fight has been more basic. Like, for example, when we had Nirbhaya, the horrendous crime that happened to Nirbhaya, the kind of response that we had from the rest from the entire country was very different and is very different. To this day, we've not had a protest that matches the scale of that to any of the Dalit women murders or rapes that has happened, right? I mean, so because we come from two very different worldviews and very different social contexts, our responses to crimes that happen to our women have also been different. And it's not just about this, it's also about mental health, it's also about fragility, it's also about, the very recent case of how we see intercaste marriages and how primarily we tend to focus the entire narrative on the Savarna woman, the Savarna wife, or the Savarna partner that has been meted out such an injustice, versus the Dalit mother who has lost her son. So we never really talk about the Dalit mother who was involved in the loss. We tend to focus our entire narrative on the Savarna woman, because we are able to relate, and by we I mean the entire world, not just Savarna feminists or just Dalit feminists. It's just that we are conditioned to relate and respond to a Savarna woman's fragility better than the Dalit woman's fragility. When we see a Dalit woman, we don't see her as a woman who's vulnerable, who's as much a woman, who's as much a human being as that of a Savarna woman. So most of our responses are also very different because we come from very different contexts. Is a Dalit woman valued? Is her life and her humanity and her love valued? Is she of value? And only when we start asking this question can we understand what happens to her in romantic relationships, both with Dalit men as well as with Savarna men. First off, we need to understand that the way the Indian system is set up is a very Hindu-influenced system. And this system, as a rule, places the highest of value to the Brahmin woman. The Brahmin woman in the Hindu world is of the highest of value, followed by the Kshatriya woman, followed by the Vaishya woman, followed by the Shudra woman. The untouchable woman is not even considered to be woman enough to be ascribed any value. Now, it is in this worldview, it is in this system that we've all conditioned into that Dalit women are expected to realize and understand and be in relationships that are supposed to be loving and nurturing. Now, when Dalit men and Savarna men see Dalit women, do they see them as women enough? Do they see them as women of value that they want themselves to partner with? Or do they see them as a victim? Do they see them as a woman who is promiscuous? Do they see them as women who are too assertive, who are too strong, who are too violent? What is the perception that men have of Dalit women? And so the perception that Dalit women, that Savarna men and Dalit men have of Dalit women, at least from my experience of both personally as well as from discussions that I've had with other Dalit women, is that they hold these three stereotypes. They are either victims, or they are extremely strong, violent women, or they are promiscuous women. Goes back to the system of Devadasis, where Dalit women were considered to be more loose, were considered to be more available, sexually available. So why would any man want to attach or partner himself with Dalit women? So again, when we talk about intercaste relationships and intercaste marriages, we have to keep this narrative that men have of Dalit women in our minds before talking about intercaste relationships are here to save the world, or here to completely take away the caste system or completely dismantle the caste system. And there are also narratives of how love is somehow revolutionary in and by itself, but again that is also problematic, and you have to ask a Dalit woman to understand how love can be very loose in different contexts, because we have unfortunately been at the receiving end of love from both Dalit men and Savarna men, which they very proudly claim to be love, but in reality it has not led to legitimization. And in a world where legitimacy is understood to be an indicator of love, that has not happened to us. I realized that it was also important to develop resources for Dalit women, authored by Dalit women, which is when I started writing pieces that have not been written before, or that has not been delved into before. Like, for example, one of my pieces is about Dalit women and mental health. Like, who talks about mental health of Dalit women? There are very, very few of us who want to interpret and understand mental health from the perspective of caste experiences, because we've gotten into this rigmarole of thinking that, depression and anxiety is very biological. So we never think about, caste-based discrimination or caste-based violence as being a trigger, as being a trauma trigger for a Dalit woman or for anyone to be having depression or anxiety. That connect has not been made. Now, who will be making this connect between what trauma is, what caste-based trauma is, and how that is influencing a person's mental health? Who is going to be making that connection? Because we don't have that many Dalit psychotherapists or psychologists or psychiatrists. We don't have Dalit mental health professionals. So who is going to be the one who's going to have this language around caste and mental health? And there's so many years have passed, like so many Dalit women for years together, our mothers, our grandmothers, our people, ourselves, our Dalit friends, we've all been suffering and we've all been handling mental health issues so quietly, so silently, because there are no resources. Psychologists and psychotherapists and psychiatrists would have no answers for us, because they don't quite understand what it means to be called a parachi when you're 7 years old, and how that actually stays in your mind for several years, and how it affects you 25 years down the line. Like, nobody talks about that because they don't understand it. They don't understand what it means to be hurt when being called a parachi when you're much younger. They don't know what it means to be called as a dark-skinned parachi when you're much, much younger, right? So these were things that I wanted to talk about. And then there was another article that I wrote about Dalit women and relationships and dating. Like, when we think about Dalit women, we have constructed them as this group of people who think alike, who have certain identities, who have certain characteristics, like as though they are homogeneous. They are not diverse people who have their own thoughts and their own experiences. So all of this is coming from a Savarna gaze. I wanted to author stories that talk about our unique experiences, and in so doing, these become unique perspectives that I hope will be able to help my Dalit women sisters and perhaps eventually my daughters.